Happy birthday, Legend of Blue Eyes. Welcome to the Solemn Yugioh channel where we discuss everything collecting and investing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, we are playing a game that I completely stole from Gary Vaynerchuk. Overrated, underrated. Basically how this will work is to honor Legend of Blue Eyes coming out on this very day, March 8th. 2002. I will be rating all of the holos from this set and how the market currently perceives them. So I will say if they're overrated, underrated, or properly rated, and also maybe add a little bit of an explanation to each of these cards. So I figured I'd be lighthearted while also talking about the market a little bit. Starting off with the secrets, we start with Tri-Horned Dragon. This card used to be not very loved. It's just not as iconic. It doesn't have that anime impact as a lot of the other cards in this set. We don't remember Joey or Yugi pulling out this card and randomly winning, it just happens to be in the set. It's still LOB, it's still a cool card. If you asked me this question a year ago, I would say underrated, still pretty cool, just no one cared. But now it saw so much hype because of LOB that I will say it's properly rated. Next we have Gaia the Dragon Champion. Now this card is iconic AF. I think it's underrated. Now that doesn't mean I'm saying, by the way, oh, this card has to go up, no, tomorrow it'll be this or that. Not at all. Just from a how many people are talking about it, what is the price rising like just everything a little bit, an all-encompassing view. I feel like it's underrated. It is very iconic, but I don't see many people talking about it, and I think that will change as we see the market play out in the slightly longer term. Getting into super rares, Man-Eater Bug. I think this card is underrated. Now, hear me out. I am not saying this card is as iconic as a Mystical Elf or a Flame Swordsman or a Celtic Guardian at all. However, for the longest time, people kind of talked shit on this card, even though it was a very strong card, given the rest of this set being filled to the brim with very shitty normal monsters. So for that reason, being a strong effect monster, Bakura used it, so it still has some of that anime power to it. I think overall it's underrated. Next we have Swords of Revealing Light. This is a tough one for me because I feel all the magic and trap cards overall are pretty underrated, but this card doesn't particularly make me very excited. So I don't think it's actually underrated as a magic card. I think it's more so properly rated. It is iconic. It was abused to hell by Yugi, by the way. This is a very cool card, but it just doesn't make me warm and fuzzy inside like some of the other cards on this list. Next we have Curse of Dragon. This card we saw Yugi use all the time. This card is epic. I like it quite a bit. And for the longest time, again, it wasn't quite as loved as some of the other cards on this list. Regardless, recently it has seen that surge together with everything else in LOB. Regardless, I will still say it's currently underrated. Next up, Mystical Elf. This card, I will simp all day and night. I think this card is super underrated. The reason for it being underrated, in my opinion, is that the waifu tax doesn't feel priced in yet. If you don't know what that means, essentially in a variety of games, whether it's Pokemon with its supporters and trainers now rising, whether it's Vanguard with a lot of the boobs cards rising, whether it's the new modern Yu-Gi-Oh stuff, if it's a girl archetype, it's gonna sell more. Waifu tax means that people, regardless of anything else, will pay more if there's a waifu on the card art. And with Mystical Elf, I don't feel that's the case yet. I feel it's just seen its rises because of the iconic anime element being used by Yugi, him making up new effects all the time to make her work, and just, all of the appreciation for LOB as a whole. But I don't see her standing above everything else because of a waifu tax yet, and that puzzles me. I think that means that this card is currently underrated, even though, again, it has seen all the growth with LOB and so forth. I think it is one of the most iconic female units in this game, and that isn't completely developed yet. Polymerization, underrated. This card as a super is extremely cheap. It is iconic, especially if you're a GX fan, because this card, obviously, it was used back in Duel Monsters. We had some really cool fusion stuff going on, but in GX, everyone was fusing 24/7. So if you're an OG fan, you just like it because, well, it's LOB, it was used quite a bit in the anime. But then if you're a GX fan, this card, I know there were other fusion cards, Power Bond and so forth, but this was still the fusion card. The whole idea of fusion, people either know fusion as a concept from Dragon Ball Z or from Yu-Gi-Oh! From the card polymerization. You even had in Pokemon, people fusing Pokemon together, in fan art and saying, oh, we're using polymerization on it or something like that. And so I feel like everyone knows this art, everyone knows what it does, and yet it's still relatively cheap, again I feel, because it's a magic card and that's not as exciting as a monster, so underrated. Next up, Trap Hole. Once again, I feel like all traps and magic cards are overall pretty underrated. This card, you know, doesn't get me warm and fuzzy like some of the other cards on this list, but I feel because it's a magic or trap card, I almost have to put it in underrated. Regardless, it's kind of in the same category as Swords of Revealing Light for me. I guess properly rated, maybe under properly rated. I don't know, somewhere in that range. Next up, Raigeki. I'm gonna call this underrated. Of course, it's all the rises of LOB and so forth, but it is part of the Power 5. This card was broken beyond belief, banned for the longest time. Now it was finally allowed to return a while ago, but still, this card's impact can't be overstated. I think as we realize that not everything has to be a monster, this card will get more and more appreciation. And so for that reason, underrated. Next up, Dark Hole, another super. This card basically does what Raigeki does, but worse. It is a magic card, so overall underrated, but I think that given that I put Raigeki in underrated, and compared to Raigeki, I would say this is more properly rated. Next up, Celtic Guardian. I think given the amount of love this card gets as a super, it is probably closer to properly rated. Again, I love this card, was used by Yugioh a lot. I will gladly buy one in the near future. I already have a European one, but I would like to buy an American English one. But overall, it's not huge on my priority list, even though for some people it might be. So I'm gonna call this one properly rated. Next up, Flame Swordsman. This is for most people their favorite super, but compared to some of the other cards in this set, I don't see it. So I'm gonna call this card slightly overrated, even though again I believe Yu-Gi-Oh as a whole is underrated. You know, compared to other cards, we can't say everything is underrated, right? So given that this is people's favorite and that I don't necessarily agree with it compared to some other cards, I'm gonna call it slightly overrated, even though I do like the card a lot. I did buy one recently already. It's cool. It's a cool card. Now we get to the big hitters, the Ultras. Now I will say I'm gonna just put everything Exodia into one category. Obviously I'm not gonna say, oh, the left arm is slightly underrated, but the right arm, that one's overrated. Like, let's not go there. Exodia as a whole in one category, I feel is underrated. I feel it makes very little sense that the individual pieces are that hated, and I do get it because, you know, you don't want to open an LOB box, you're hoping for a red eyes, a blue eyes, a dark magician or whatever, and then you pull an arm and a leg. I'm sorry, Ruxin. That is not particularly exciting for people. And I get that, but regardless, if you are a collector, that chase must also excite you. Trying to complete the puzzle like, you know, like we just saw in the anime, you know, it was special to get these pieces together, and now in real life it's also special to get these pieces together. For some people, having a full Exodia set is kind of like the crown jewel of their collection. I think the most stereotypical collector goal people have is 3 blue eyes, depending on your budget, you know, some kind of blue eyes, but 3 of the same blue eyes, like Kaiba, and then an Exodia set would be, you know, number 2 in those collection goals. And so while it is the case, I then wonder, some of these pieces are still quite cheap. It is still LOB, it is still Ultra. You're gonna still have to open a box of, I don't know, what is the price now? Is it 30? Is it 40? Is it 25? Whatever price you think LOB is, you're still gonna have to open a 5-figure box to get these cards. You're probably gonna get a 9, unlucky an 8, if you're lucky a 10, straight out of that box. So I don't know. It feels kind of weird how cheap some of these still are and how few people are really going after them. Next up, Monster Reborn. This card is massively underrated. It might be the most underrated card on this entire list. This is an Ultra. It is a magic card, so therefore less people are excited about it. But do you know how iconic this card is? Everyone had it because of their starter deck stuff, so everyone knows the card. We saw it in the anime being used to revive stuff at the most crucial time. It was broken beyond belief in the game for a long ass time, and even now combo decks still sometimes tech it in because it's a useful extender. This card is Yu-Gi-Oh! It is also the only Ultra magic card in this set for a very good reason. There's also plenty of memes of you know, people saying, oh, my dick is limb or something, and then going Monster Reborn, whatever the fuck, you know, there's plenty of cringe that Yu-Gi-tubers like to react to, and I get it, it's good content and so forth. But so this card is memed a lot as well. This card has so much going for it, and despite that, I still find not many people really talking much about it, and so for that reason, massively underrated in my opinion. Next up, Red Eyes Black Dragon. Bit of a weird one, because you do have starter deck Joey, also in ultra rare, basically the same card. Now some people will say, oh, but the stock is a bit different. Sure, and again, it's harder to get an LOB Red Eyes than it is a starter deck card. And then the starter deck was also way more printed than SDK and SDY, so that also doesn't help it. Overall, I'm gonna say this is properly rated from a population perspective, but I think Red Eyes as a whole is underrated because everyone's simping over Blue Eyes so much, and you have all these, you know, self-fulfilling prophecies working on him, that people are like kind of forgetting that there's a massive amount of people who didn't like the arrogant dick Kaiba, and I did like him, but many people didn't, and were fans of Joey. And these people love Red Eyes, and these people like Red Eyes. They like the underdog, and so that's being forgotten a bit. So I feel like Red Eyes is in that underdog category. Next up, Gaia the Fierce Knight. I feel this card is underrated once again because you need to realize that Yugi used it in his deck. It's still hard to pull. It's still an ultra. It's very cool art, iconic AF. I do get it's one of the least exciting ultras to pull. I think if people had to like rank what they don't want to pull, probably a Limb is the thing they least want to pull, and then they want to pull a Gaia the Fierce Knight maybe after that, and then we get into the bigger hitters that people are excited to pull. And I get that because this card is definitely not in the same realm as a Red Eyes, a Blue Eyes, or a Dark Magician, but still, I don't know, it feels a bit odd to me. It's not as underrated, I want to say, as Red Eyes, because obviously it's not as cool as Red Eyes, but I think it's out there. Next up, Dark Magician. I'm gonna say it, I think this Dark Magician is slightly overrated. Now again, Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole to me is underrated, but we have to speak in relative terms. And the reason for that is, I don't think this art is very cool, and I think most people prefer the starter deck Yugi art. And so while this is LOB, and I like it quite a bit, I have one myself, you know, I enjoy looking at it and so forth. If we have to say some cards are overrated, I think Dark Magician is kind of overrated, in LOB specifically. However, from then looking at a perspective of everyone simping for Blue Eyes, we are forgetting the protagonist use Dark Magician, and a lot of people like the protagonist. Maybe in that regard it's underrated. So maybe I would have to, you know, change my statement and say that this art of Dark Magician is slightly overrated, but Dark Magician as a whole is underrated. Next up, we get to the final card, the Big Daddy. Blue Eyes White Dragon. I think most people know what I'm gonna say here. I think LOB Blue Eyes is overrated. The last two sales for this card were $85,000. I think a lot of other cards are gonna outperform that in the short and long term, because a lot of hype is already being priced into this card that way. I do not believe this card is supposed to be 85. Most people enjoy the anime art. They don't particularly like the broken neck art. Now Blue Eyes as a whole, I think it's properly rated, because Blue Eyes, you know, it's the mascot. Everyone knows him. Everyone's already simping for Blue Eyes. How can I say Blue Eyes is underrated when everyone already rates him as the best, right? We all already agree on that one. So saying it's underrated would be a bit too hype-ish to me, but calling this card underrated, considering the price movement it had and then all of the controversy around it, I think LOB art is overrated. But hey, that's my opinion. You're free to disagree with it. Hope you found this interesting. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Ciao.